All right, let me start with a question. When was the last time you felt like your member of Congress represented you? Okay, yeah, you're laughing, exactly. You're not alone. I get this question very frequently. What the hell is going on in Washington? And do you have any idea what my representative does for me? I totally get it. Look, we live in a time of deep cynicism, a lot of distrust. We don't like how these guys are operating, and you look at it, it feels like money in politics keeps average people out of Washington, gerrymandering, too many lobbyists, partisanship, polarization. So all of those contribute to this feeling. But there's actually a foundational reason, I think, that you feel so distant from your government. And it goes back to the loss of what was supposed to be fundamental. The House of Representatives was designed to be the people's house, and right now, it is no longer built for the people. Let me explain. Our framers, look, they had some flaws, but they created a pretty brilliant blueprint. The problem is, we don't follow that blueprint very often. Certainly not as often as we should. And when it came to the creation of a Congress, and specifically the House of Representatives, the whole point of the creation of the House of Representatives was to make it the people's house, to give access to an average person to a seat at the table for power. Okay, we created our own version of the House of Lords with the Senate. You know, we weren't going to give the people's house full control, okay, but we were going to give them a seat at the table, right? We created this sort of semi-elected monarch with the presidency. We had the big people in robes with the judiciary, that House of Lords. But the House of Representatives, that was our access to power. That was our access to a seat at the table. And they had a pretty interesting design, which was the House was going to expand with the population of the country. And for 120 years, it worked pretty well. The first Congress had 65 members of the House. And 120 years later, in 1913, we got up to 435 members of the House. Every 10 years, with the census, we didn't just reapportion where congressional districts were. We actually expanded the number of congressional districts. But then 1920 happened. 1920, that census, there was a big fight. I know you'll be shocked to learn that Congress was polarized and undecided of which party should get the advantage when it came to reapportionment and redistricting and all that. So they had a big fight about where to expand the House, and who should get the advantage, urban communities, rural communities, et cetera. Well, they couldn't come up with a solution. So in 1930, they created this hard cap, 435 members. They locked it in 1930. At that point in time, one member of Congress represented just under 300,000 people. That's a pretty reasonable ratio. That was 1930. This is 95 years later. And where are we? We now have one member of Congress for every 800,000 citizens. The country's population has tripled, and Congress has stayed the same. So let's think about what a congressional district of 800,000 people is and put it in context. 800,000. That's a large city. Austin, Texas is America's 14th largest city. It doesn't quite have 800,000 people. That's a major metro area. Does one person, is that a community of interest, or is that a lot of communities of interest? It is hard for one member of Congress to represent every community in that major 800,000 populated city. So what do? You get members of Congress that represent factions within factions, right? Maybe it's a primary voter faction. Maybe it's a business interest that's dominant enough that they are able to have the financial power to create that. But what it is not somebody who's representing everybody's interest or a large chunk of that district's interest. They don't know everybody's local school system. They don't know everybody's transportation system. They don't know exactly how to go to Washington to represent everybody in their community of interest. They choose to represent whatever community of interest gets them reelected. And when you have that large of a constituency, that means it's a lot easier to manipulate. And what happens You end up disengaging. That, a lot of people feel as if they're out of touch, and you have a large congressional district, you're more likely to disengage. And the more we disengage, we've seen what's happened. Congress over the last 30 years is so far away from the people, so afraid to make decisions, they keep handing power to the executive branch. And by doing that, it has created, frankly, this polarized society that we've had this entire century, where we have these knockdown, drag-out fights over who's going to be king of the country, when really it was never what the intended design of our government and our small d democracy was meant to be. And here's the beauty of this fix of our current political problems. We don't need a constitutional amendment to do this. All you need is an act of Congress. So here's my plan. Let's get back to where the House consistently expands with the size of the population. Now, in order to sort of catch up, I want to start with 400,000. That's the cap. So where did I come up with 400,000? The 50th largest city in America is Arlington, Texas. They're right at 50, and their population is, yesterday it might have been 399,000, and I think today it might be just over 400. But it's right there, right at 400. Now, I'd argue Arlington is a community of interest. For those of you that are familiar with Arlington, Texas, that's the home of the Dallas Cowboys. So Jerry Jones is your biggest constituent, if you're representing that constituency. But 400,000 feels, you're not representing all of Dallas, all of North Texas. You're representing the community of interest of Arlington, Texas. So 400,000. So what would that do? It would take us to 881 members of Congress. And I know what some of you are thinking. First of all, if you live in Washington, you're like, no more traffic. Oh my God. More politicians means more staffers, means more life. But believe it or not, more politicians is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because it means there would be more voices representing more people. It's called democracy. 881 people. I don't think it would be just the two parties that would have all 881 members of Congress. I think when you have a smaller playing field, you would get more diverse membership in Congress. And diversity comes in all types of ways. It's not just diversity in looks or in ethnicity. It'll be diversity of political thought. I think you'll get libertarians. I think you'll get Green Party members. When we had a very activist House of Representatives that was constantly growing, we had a lot more third party and fourth party and independent members of the House. Just go look at the membership in the 19th century and the early 20th century. But since we've capped the House, it's become this sort of two-party duopoly. But there's a couple other things that make this idea give some intended consequences that actually creates a couple of fixes that will only restore more people's faith in the democracy. Here's the biggest fix it makes. Without a constitutional amendment, this will solve the electoral college dilemma. Right? We have now had twice in the last 25 years, the popular vote winner has lost the electoral college. Previous to those two times, we'd only had it happen once in over 100 years. Again, there was a reason for that, because as we were expanding the House, right, the electoral college numbers grew with it. And so it was up until it was more likely that the popular vote winner would match the electoral college winner. Now, of course, because we have condensed things, it is, we have a, in our polarized environment, probably a 5 to 10% chance that we're going to have that kind of split decision. And that is no way to make people feel as if we have a small d democratic, fair election system. But here's the beauty of expanding the House. So take the issue of Wyoming versus California in the Electoral College. Currently, in our current system, if you live in Wyoming, you have 6 times more influence on the presidential vote in the Electoral College than if you live in America's largest state, California. Under my plan, a Wyoming voter would still have more say in the presidential election than a California voter. But the ratio goes down to 2.5 to 1, which I would argue is actually within what the framers intended. Because remember the other thing the framers were concerned about. Large states having too much influence over small states, but giving small states at least a shot at some equality there. This balances things out. Here's the second thing it does. We all hate gerrymandering, right? Well, when you have 435 pieces of the puzzle, those are big pieces of the puzzle. It's kind of easy to manipulate big pieces of the puzzle. You have 881 pieces of this puzzle. Much smaller, much harder to create these ridiculous, like I-85 congressional districts, or my favorite, like Ohio goes along the border of, I think, Lake Erie, for 150 miles, as if people that just live on the coast of a lake all have something in common, right? They don't share the same school systems. They don't share the same transportation systems and things like that. But it created, right, the political result that they wanted. Well, if you have 881 pieces, it's just, I'm not saying gerrymandering is not going to occur. Okay? It's human nature. Politics, people are always looking for an advantage. It's just going to be that much harder to manipulate the system. So look, we've got a lot of problems to fix this current. We know our current system is broken. Whether it's faith in the democracy, whether it's faith in what I've done for a living in being a journalist, I would argue the problems are solved if you do the same thing, which is get closer to the people. We journalists need to get closer to the people and report what's going on in their communities. And our politicians need to get closer to the people. They're not going to do it on their own. We can do it if we uncap the House. You want to make the presidential race seem fair again? Uncap the House. You want to make democracy seem local again? Uncap the House. You want to have members of Congress that you might actually know in your community? You uncap the House. It's a simple solution. It follows the framers. It's constitutional. And all it takes is an act of Congress. So yes, the solution to all our problems is more politicians. Anyway, thank you very much.